One of the students asked what is one of the most significant or interesting objects that I've ever had a chance to work on. And this object was in the collection before I started here about 22 years ago, but it's a Civil War Medal of Honor. And as you know, the Medal of Honor is the highest award that a military person can receive for heroism above and beyond the call of duty, for doing more than what is expected of them as a service person. In our Civil War exhibit here, we have that object on display. It's a Civil War Medal of Honor, and it was earned by Edward James Bebb, who served in the 6th Iowa Volunteer Cavalry. And Bebb fought in one of the last battles of the Civil War. He and five or six other Iowans received the Medal of Honor for charging down a bridge at night and capturing the Confederate cannons that were guarding the approach to the bridge on the opposite end. And it very much symbolizes what the museum interprets here, which is the service of Iowans, and in this example for Private Bebb, someone who went above and beyond the call of duty. So very much a privilege of mine to have a chance to work with an object like this. It is a bit of a rarity in Iowa. It's the only one that I'm aware of that is in 100% complete condition with its presentation box. Another question that was asked was, how do we preserve ancient artifacts? Most of the artifacts that we have here in our collection date from about 1865 to the present, so we don't have really artifacts that I would describe as ancient, but some of the oldest ones that we have on display are on loan to us from our friends over at the Office of the State Archaeologist in Iowa City. And they're part of our Military Frontier exhibit. And these objects here are early trade items that were traded back and forth between Native American groups, the European settlers, in this example, the French and the British, traded back and forth along the Iowa frontier in the 16 and 1700s. One of the best ways to preserve objects that are that old is to handle them very carefully. In addition, when they're put on display or when they're stored, store them in a safe environment. We'll cushion it with some maybe polyester batting, and store them in an acid-free environment. And also, if they're metal objects like these, we want to control the humidity level in the storage area so that they don't get surface rust or corrode any more than might already be the case. Another student asked, how do I decide what isn't displayed? Like most museums, we have more things in storage than we have room to exhibit. So oftentimes when I select an artifact to go on display, for the example here, a World War I German machine gun, this is the only one that we have that is on its original mount, a four-legged stand for the machine gun that could be collapsed or positioned higher to fire over a row of sandbags as we have it exhibited here. So oftentimes what isn't exhibited is determined by what physical condition is it in. Is it sturdy enough to undergo being put on exhibit? Or is it complete so that when it goes on exhibit, it gives a good example of what this type of artifact looked like when it was used? In this example, this is the most complete one that we have, but it's still missing some of the equipment, the spare barrel, and some of the cleaning tools that went along with it. Another good question was, how do we utilize technology to enhance the exhibit environment? And one of the best examples we have here at Camp Dodge is an exhibit that we put together focusing on technology, military technology in the First World War in the form of machine gun fire, rapid fire artillery, high explosive shells. We were able to orchestrate an environment where not only do we stimulate you visually, but also using sound and sight and some motion, we've recreated what it would be like to undergo a shelling in a trench in the First World War. So as you walk in, when you reach about halfway through the trench, you'll trigger a motion detector, and that initiates the sensory aspects of the exhibit, and you'll start to hear small arms fire, bursts of machine gun fire, and then the enemy will begin their artillery fire on the position. And then we have flashes behind the sandbags to simulate the explosion of shells. But we use technology here quite a bit, and implementing technology in exhibit comes at a cost. It's not quite as expensive as it used to be in the digital age. It's a lot easier to obtain computers and imagery and light shows compared to the way it was 30 years ago when I first got into the museum business. So I'll invite you to walk down the trench here and you can experience that for yourself. One of the questions that was asked was, how do we find the artifacts, the objects, the photos, the documents that we put on display? The museum here at Camp Dodge has been here for 36 years, so we have a collection of over 100,000 objects, letters, diaries, photographs, artifacts, weapons, uniforms, insignia. But once in a while it helps to borrow an object from another institution. In this example, we have the wreckage of a Japanese balloon bomb that was sent through the air across the Pacific Ocean during the end of World War II, late 1944, and 3 of them landed in Iowa. This example came down near Lorenz, Iowa, up in the northwest part of the state, and these items were collected by an FBI agent from Iowa, and then years later after the war he donated them to the State Historical Society. This is a very much an unknown aspect of World War II. A lot of people have no idea that the Japanese delivered bombs to the United States via balloons. And like I said, 3 of them made their way to Iowa. So it was very fun for me to know that this was in the collection at the State Historical Society and that they were kind enough here at the museum in Des Moines to let us borrow that to include in our World War II Pacific exhibit. Another good question was, how do we kind of decide how to organize the exhibit and determine what's going to be in it? Or if someone was going to do an exhibit for the first time, what kind of advice would I give them? And the answer to that, in my own experience, is select a manageable topic. It's very similar to writing a history paper. You could write a paper on the First World War, but there are books that have been written on the First World War. So if you want to find a subtopic, if you can, that would be better, whether it's weapons of World War I or the cavalry or artillery, something like that, using military examples, but that goes to any aspect of U.S. or world history upon which you might want to base an exhibit. Secondly, select a topic so that you can find imagery and artifacts and documents that tell that story. If you don't have those things, it's very tough to put an exhibit together. And if you do, it ends up being a book on a wall because you end up substituting mostly pictures and words for the artifacts or the maps that you would need to adequately tell that story. Behind me is our World War II Pacific exhibit, and almost violating what I said earlier about keeping the topic small, the Pacific War lasted 3.5 years and was covered almost 1/3 of the globe. But in our example here, we pared it down by selecting objects from the collection that were Japanese artifacts, weapons, canteen, helmets, etc., that were picked up by Iowa veterans. And in the other case, we have similar things that were issued to Iowa veterans as far as their small arms and ammunition belt, canteen, etc. So you can walk back and forth and compare what a Japanese soldier used to fight in the Pacific War next to what American personnel used. And then in the background, we have a mock-up of a beach scene. And in the distance is a Japanese machine gun nest, a Japanese field gun. Looks like it's been captured, and that one actually was, and that's how it ended up in a museum in Iowa. And oftentimes you have to use a basic background. People will walk in here and ask, well, what island is this in the Pacific? And I just sort of jokingly say, well, it's a Pacific island, because if I say it's Guam, or I say it was Tinian, or I say it was Iwo Jima, someone's going to criticize me because the sand isn't the right color, or the terrain depicted in the background is too tall or too flat. And so this just gives us almost like putting on a play. We set up the backdrop and then put the 3-dimensional and 2-dimensional objects on display, and it gives us a good setting to do that. Another student wondered, what's been one of my best experiences at another museum? There are a number of great museums across the country. I always encourage you to go by and visit when you have time and you have a chance. One of my first real wow experiences was at the 1st Infantry Division in Wheaton, Illinois. It's northwest of downtown Chicago. And in their D-Day exhibit, you sit on benches and you have field telephones and you listen to the introduction about how the Normandy operation was planned and how we worked together with the Allies to succeed at placing troops on the beach and advancing inward. And what was interesting about that exhibit, when it was done, you sat and you watched a screen, sat on benches and listened on the field telephones. And when it was over, you put the field telephones back and the screen goes out and you walk out onto a beach, and it's the wreckage of the D-Day landing. There are crates that are torn open and spent shells, and there's a German bunker with a gun barrel sticking out of it, and it's dark and carbon covered, like it had taken a hit and burned from the inside. And when we were designing our World War II in Europe exhibit, I wanted to have that kind of immersive experience for visitors. So we ended up building a German bunker, and we put the visitors on the inside of a German machine gun bunker looking out onto the Normandy beach. On the left side are items used by Iowans that participated in the Normandy landing. And on the right side, we have typical German weapons and equipment that would have been used by the German soldiers defending the Normandy beach. But one of the best aspects was that we used a German MG-34 machine gun. And if you position yourself just right on the breech end, you can look down the sights of the machine gun and get an idea in scale what kind of firepower was rained down on Iowans and others that were storming the beach at Normandy that day. Another student asked, how do we come up with innovative or new or creative ways to put on an exhibit? In our Korean War gallery, We wanted to tell the story of the first jet versus jet air combat between US F-86 Sabres and Russian-built MiG-15 jet aircraft. And so we achieved that by contracting with another exhibit firm, and they sculpted and constructed out of foam a full-scale nose of an F-86 Sabre. And then we contracted with an artist, John Neal, who is very, very good, lives here in Des Moines, to have him project the rest of the aircraft on the wall so that when visitors arrive at my position in the exhibit and look to the left, it looks like an entire aircraft has been parked in the gallery, which of course it hasn't. But in a dramatic way, we've recreated that nose with the kill markings indicating the MiG shot down by a Air Force pilot from rural Sway City up in the northern part of the state named Hal Fisher, Captain Hal Fisher. And so we also use the Marsden matting underneath that they utilized for temporary airfields. They would grade the ground flat and lock those panels together. If it was hit by a bomb or something, they could pry out the damaged ones, fill in the hole, lock new ones in place, and they were back in business. So with just a little bit of real estate, some creativity, and some old Marsden matting, we were able to achieve the look we were after in a creative and unique way. Another student asked, how long does it take to do the research for a display? And that comes down to, of course, how large is the exhibit area going to be? Is it going to be 100 square feet or 10 foot by 10 foot exhibit area? Or will it be 1,000 square feet, 100 by 100 square feet? So it depends. The answer is it depends. It's always best to start way early, give yourself enough time, because you never know when you might discover a resource or information somewhere that's not here, maybe in our library, but is nearby at the State Historical Society or Drake University or the State Historical Society Archive in Iowa City, or maybe some other location where you have to go and do some research. The only analogy I can think of, it depends on how much research you have to put in to do a 5-page paper, a 10-page paper, or a 15-page paper. The larger it is, the more time it's going to take.